Look, if you're expecting some grand tale about a chosen one who always knew they were special, you're in the wrong story. This is about Mara Kowalski, who at the age of 22 had achieved the remarkable distinction of being aggressively average at literally everything she'd ever attempted. She wasn't bad at things, mind you. She was just reliably, consistently, almost artistically mediocre. Middle of her class in high school. Decent enough at sports to make the team, but never good enough to actually play. She could cook exactly 3 meals without consulting a recipe, and 2 of them involved pasta. She was the human equivalent of a participation trophy, which made it all the more baffling that she'd somehow been accepted into the Galactic Defense Academy. The GDA was the most prestigious military training institution in known space, where the best and brightest from hundreds of species came to learn the art of not getting obliterated by space pirates, dimensional anomalies, or the occasional sentient black hole with a bad attitude. It was located on Unity Station, a massive orbital platform that looked like someone had decided to build a city inside a particularly aggressive geometric shape. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for about 30 years, and honestly, the other species were still getting used to us. We were sort of the cosmic equivalent of that friend who shows up to the party uninvited, eats all the good snacks, and then asks if anyone wants to see pictures of their dog. The general consensus among the galactic elite was that humans were charmingly primitive. We'd barely figured out faster than light travel, our weapons technology was laughably outdated, and apparently we were the only species in the known galaxy that willingly consumed ethanol as a recreational activity and called it a good time. Mara had been assigned a roommate on her first day at the academy. This was Kirill, a Centauri who stood about 7 feet tall, had 4 arms, deep purple skin, and enough anxiety to power a small starship. Centauri were known for their exceptional organizational skills and their ability to see in 16 different color spectrums, which Kirill used primarily to color-code everything in their shared living space. Everything. The towels were organized by shade, the food in their shared kitchenette was arranged by nutritional content and alphabetically by species of origin. Kirill had even labeled the floor tiles based on optimal traffic patterns. "You cannot put your boots there," Kirill said one morning, all 4 arms gesturing frantically at Mara's offending footwear. "That is a transition zone. Boots belong in the designated footwear quadrant." "Gale, Kirill buddy, it's 6 in the morning. Time is irrelevant to spatial organization." That's definitely something a person who's fun at parties would say. Despite the obsessive tidiness, Mara had grown fond of her roommate. Kirill made excellent tea, never touched Mara's leftover pizza, and had a genuinely kind heart beneath all that neurotic energy. The academy itself was a study in controlled chaos. The hallways were filled with species of every conceivable shape and size. You had your standard bipeds like humans, your insectoid types with too many legs, your floating energy beings who were constantly apologizing for accidentally interfering with electronic devices, and one species that was basically a sentient fungus colony that somehow qualified for officer training. Humans occupied a weird space in this hierarchy. We weren't the weakest species. That honor went to the Pippins, who were basically space hamsters with a knack for engineering. But we definitely weren't winning any awards for natural talent either. No telepathy, no extra limbs, no ability to breathe in different atmospheres without suits. We were just kind of there, enthusiastically stumbling through courses designed for beings with natural advantages we'd never possessed. The faculty treated human cadets with a sort of patient condescension, like teachers dealing with enthusiastic but not particularly bright students, which was fine. Mara had been dealing with low expectations her entire life. Which brings us to the incident that would make everything significantly more complicated. It was a Tuesday, which felt appropriately mundane for what was about to happen. The Academy had announced mandatory security clearance updates for all cadets. This happened every semester, a bureaucratic box that needed checking. Everyone would file through the security office, get their biometrics scanned, receive their updated clearance credentials, and go about their day. Mara was standing in line behind a Kralix cadet named Vex, who kept nervously shedding scales, and in front of a floating Aquarian who smelled faintly of seawater and regret. The line moved slowly, because of course it did. This was a military institution, and if there's one thing military institutions excel at, it's turning a 5-minute process into a 2-hour ordeal. Nax called Commander Vesh from behind the scanning station. Vesh was the Academy's chief security officer, a Krolix who looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a bureaucrat and then given the result a personality disorder centered around following regulations. He had scales the color of gunmetal, eyes that never blinked, and the emotional range of a parking meter. Mara shuffled forward, already dreading the inevitable small talk. "Name," Vesh said, not looking up from his data. "Mara Kowalski, human, second-year cadet. Serial number." "Place your hand on the scanner." Mara complied, pressing her palm against the sleek black surface of the biometric reader. It was standard technology, used across the galaxy for everything from security clearance to cafeteria payments. The device hummed softly, cataloging her genetic markers, retinal patterns, and probably her preference in breakfast cereals for all she knew. "Access level, trainee," the display read, exactly as expected. "Step aside," Vesh commanded, already waving forward the next cadet. The morning continued in this fashion, cadet after cadet, species after species, each receiving their updated credentials with mechanical efficiency. Access level, trainee, access level, trainee, one after another, like the galaxy's most boring assembly line. Mara was almost at the exit, already thinking about lunch, when Commander Vesh's voice crackled over the intercom. "Cadet Kowalski, return to the scanning station." She turned around, confused. "I already went through." "There's been an error. We need to rescan you." Mara sighed and made her way back through the crowd of waiting cadets. This was typical. Human biology sometimes played weird with alien technology. She'd probably just need a secondary scan to confirm her genetic markers or whatever. But this time, Commander Vesh didn't direct her to the standard biometric reader. He led her to a door she'd never noticed before, tucked away in the corner of the security office. Beyond it was a small room containing a single device that looked considerably older and significantly more important than anything else in the building. It was clearly Forerunner technology. Even Mara, with her aggressively average understanding of galactic history, knew what that meant. The Forerunners were the extinct civilization that had supposedly seeded the galaxy with technology and knowledge before vanishing mysteriously about 50,000 years ago. Their artifacts were rare, powerful, and functioned on principles that modern science still couldn't fully explain. "The primary scanner flagged your biometrics as anomalous," Vesh explained, his tone suggesting this was somehow Mara's fault. "Protocol requires verification through the Forerunner lock." Cool, Mara said, because what else do you say when you're being scanned by technology older than your entire species' written history? "So I just..." "Place your hand on the reader." Mara pressed her palm against the ancient surface. It felt warm, almost organic, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, everything happened at once. The Forerunner lock didn't just scan Mara, it examined her. She could feel it, somehow, like invisible fingers rifling through her genetic code, the way you'd flip through a filing cabinet. It was deeply uncomfortable, like someone reading your browser history out loud in front of your grandmother. The device hummed, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Commander Vesh stood beside her, datapad in hand, clearly expecting this to be a quick confirmation that would let him get back to his precious protocols. The holographic display above the lock flickered through various alien scripts, cycling through what had to be hundreds of languages. Mara caught glimpses of symbols she recognized from her xenolinguistics course, others that looked like someone had sneezed on a keyboard, and a few that actually hurt to look at directly. Then the cycling stopped. The display settled on crisp, clear Galactic standard text. "Scanning complete. Genetic profile recognized. Access level, creator." There was a beat of absolute silence. "Huh?" Mara said, because her brain had apparently decided this was an appropriate response to cosmic impossibility. Commander Vesh's scales went from gunmetal gray to a pale, sickly yellow. His datapad clattered to the floor. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. "Thing like this happen." "That's not..." Vesh started. his usually monotone voice climbing into registers Mara didn't know Krallick's vocal cords could reach. "That's not possible. That's not remotely possible. I mean, it's right there on the screen," Mara pointed out helpfully. "Creator-level access hasn't registered on any scanner in 50,000 years. Vesh was backing away from her now, like she'd suddenly sprouted tentacles. "The Forerunners are extinct. They've been extinct since before most of our species achieved spaceflight." "Okay, but counterpoint," Mara said, trying very hard to remain calm despite the blaring alarms and the security officer who looked like he was about to pass out. "Maybe your machine's broken." "Forerunner technology doesn't break," Vesh whispered, and he actually sounded scared. "It doesn't malfunction. It doesn't glitch. It simply is." More alarms joined the first, creating a symphony of "oh no" that echoed through the entire security wing. Red emergency lights strobed across the walls. Mara could hear running footsteps in the corridor outside, along with shouted commands in at least 6 different languages. "So what exactly does creator-level access mean?" Mara asked, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. Vesh had gone completely non-verbal, just staring at her, like she'd announced she was actually 3 space raccoons in a human suit. Which, to be fair, would have been less shocking than whatever this was. The door burst open, and approximately 15 security personnel flooded into the small room, weapons drawn, all of them pointing directly at Mara. Which seemed excessive, but then again, she was apparently registering as a member of an extinct super-civilization, so maybe this was standard protocol for cosmic impossibilities. "Hands where we can see them," barked a Vorian security chief whose name tag read Threnix. "They're literally right here," Mara said, raising her hands. "They've been here the whole time. I have a very strict policy about keeping my hands visible during normal security scans, gone existentially weird." "Check the scanner," Threnix ordered. One of the security officers, a nervous-looking pipit who barely came up to Mara's waist, scurried over to the Forerunner device. She tapped at a holographic interface, her whiskers twitching frantically. "It's confirmed," the pipit squeaked. "Access level, creator. Genetic markers match Forerunner baseline profiles at 99.7%. "That's impossible," Threnix said, echoing Vesh's earlier sentiment. "Yeah, we've established that," Mara said. "And yet, here we are, living in impossible times. Can someone please turn off those alarms? I'm getting a headache." Nobody moved to turn off the alarms. "Cadet Kowalski," Threnix said, his voice taking on the careful tone you'd use when negotiating with someone who might be carrying antimatter. "I'm going to need you to come with us." "Am I under arrest?" "That depends. Are you secretly a Forerunner?" "I'm pretty sure I'd remember being part of an ancient extinct civilization," Mara said. "My memory's not great, but it's not that bad." "Then you won't mind answering some questions." It wasn't really a question. They escorted Mara through the academy halls, and word had apparently spread faster than physics should allow, because every cadet they passed stopped to stare. Some pointed. Others pulled out their communication devices to record the spectacle. A few of the more religious species actually genuflected, which was deeply uncomfortable. Kirill appeared from around a corner, all 4 arms loaded with neatly organized data tablets. When they saw Mara surrounded by armed guards, all the tablets crashed to the floor in a cascade of breaking glass and sparking circuits. "Mara, what is happening? Why are there 17 security personnel? That's 4 more than standard threat response protocol dictates." "Apparently I'm a cosmic anomaly," Mara called back. "Don't wait up, this might take a while." They brought her to the Academy Council chambers, a massive circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the stars outside the station. Around the perimeter sat the council members, representatives from the major species that funded and operated the GDA. At the center was Dean Korthax, a Vorian who looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a philosophy professor and given the result a flair for dramatic speeches. His skin was a deep crimson, and his multiple eye stalks were all focused on Mira with an intensity that suggested he was either deeply concerned or planning to break into Shakespearean monologue. To his left floated Professor Gleam, An Aquarian whose translucent jellyfish-like body was currently leaking what Mara hoped was water, but suspected was nervous sweat. Various organs pulsed visibly inside Gleam's gelatinous form, which was fascinating from a biological standpoint and deeply unsettling from a having to look at it standpoint. The other council members were an assortment of the usual suspects: a Zentari administrator who looked like Quill's more judgmental older sibling, a Kralix general whose scales had the dull sheen of someone who'd seen too many combat zones, a floating energy being whose name was unpronounceable and who communicated through a translation device that made them sound like a very disappointed GPS. And in the back, looking almost as confused as Mara felt, was Dr. Remnick, the only other human on the Academy faculty. He was in his 50s, with gray hair that suggested he'd spent most of his career dealing with bureaucratic nonsense, and currently wore the expression of someone who'd just been called to a meeting without being told what the meeting was about. "Right, Cadet Kowalski," Dean Korthax began, his voice resonating through the chamber like he was performing at the Globe Theater. "Do you have any idea why you've been brought before this council?" "Because your ancient security scanner thinks I'm a Forerunner," Mara offered. "Our ancient security scanner doesn't think," Korthax said. "It knows. The Forerunner biometric systems are incapable of error. They were designed by the most advanced civilization in galactic history, and they have never, not once in 50,000 years, produced a false positive." "Well, there's a first time for everything." Professor Gleam leaked more aggressively. "This is no laughing matter. Creator-level access grants complete control over all Forerunner systems, weapons platforms, defense grids, the archive networks. If this reading is accurate, you have more raw authority over galactic infrastructure than any living being." "But it's not accurate," Mara said, trying to inject some reason into this increasingly surreal conversation. "Because I'm a human. From Earth. I grew up in Cleveland. I failed my driver's test twice. My greatest achievement before coming here was winning 3rd place in a regional science fair with a baking soda volcano. Does that sound like the resume of an all-powerful ancient being to you?" "What if you've been modified?" suggested the Kralix general. "Genetic engineering, illegal augmentation designed to spoof Forerunner recognition systems." "With what money? Do you know how much student debt I'm in? I can barely afford instant noodles." "Perhaps a sleeper agent," the Zentari administrator chimed in. "Programmed with false memories, inserted into our institution for purposes of espionage or sabotage." Dr. Remnick finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the increasingly absurd theories. "With all due respect, if someone wanted to create a sleeper agent, they probably wouldn't make her spectacularly mediocre at everything. Mara's academic record shows she's average at best in every subject. She's never displayed any unusual abilities or knowledge." "Hey," Mara said. "I'm right here." "I'm defending you," Remnick said. "You're doing a terrible job." Dean Korthax raised several tentacles for silence. "There's only one way to verify this. We must test her on other Forerunner systems. If this is a genuine creator recognition, then all Forerunner technology will respond to her. If it's some form of error or deception, we'll know immediately." "And if I refuse?" Mara asked. "You'll remain in custody until we figure out what you are," Korthax said simply, "because one way or another, Cadet Kowalski, you've just become the most important person on this station." Mara looked around the chamber at the assembled alien faces, all staring at her with mixtures of suspicion, fear, and what might have been awe. "This is going to seriously mess up my class schedule, isn't it?" Nobody answered, but based on the uncomfortable silence, Mara was pretty sure her academic career had just taken a very weird turn. The Academy Council apparently didn't believe in wasting time, which Mara might have appreciated under literally any other circumstances. Within an hour, she'd been escorted to the first testing location, the Forerunner Vault in Sub-Level 9, a place she'd heard whispered about but never actually seen. The vault was impressive in that aggressively ancient way that made you feel like your entire civilization was basically still finger painting. The walls were made of some material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid depending on how you looked at it. Glowing symbols pulsed along the surfaces in patterns that probably meant something profound, but just gave Mara a vague sense of unease. At the center of the room sat a sealed container roughly the size of a refrigerator, covered in more of those eye-watering symbols. According to the placard next to it, this artifact had been sealed for 12,000 years. Scholars from 600 species had attempted to open it. None had succeeded. "Approach the container," Dean Corthax commanded, his tentacles gesturing dramatically like he was directing an opera. "What's inside?" Mara asked. "We don't know. That's rather the point." "Cool, cool. Love opening mysterious ancient containers without knowing if they're full of treasure or, I don't know, galaxy-ending plagues?" "The Forerunners wouldn't create anything deliberately harmful," Professor Gleam burbled, though their translucent body was leaking so profusely they were leaving puddles on the floor. "You're literally nervous sweating everywhere," Mara pointed out. "That doesn't exactly inspire confidence." "Thank you very much," Gleam protested weakly. Mara approached the container, very aware that approximately 30 pairs of eyes, eye stalks, and various optical sensors were tracking her every movement. Some of the council members had brought recording equipment. Others were taking notes. The Kralix general just stood there with his hand on his sidearm, which seemed both excessive and ominous. Dr. Remnick gave her an encouraging nod from the back of the room, though his expression suggested he was just as confused as she was about this entire situation. "So, I just touch it?" Mara asked. "If you are truly recognized as creator level, the container will respond to your presence," Corthax explained. "Simply place your hand upon the surface." Mara reached out, half expecting nothing to happen and this whole mess to be revealed as some elaborate prank. Maybe she'd been selected for one of those hidden camera shows that were apparently popular among the Zentari. Her fingers brushed the container's surface. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The symbols blazed with light so bright that half the observers yelped and covered their various optical organs. The container's seal hissed, released pressure that hadn't moved in 12 millennia, and the lid simply slid open with a soft click. Inside was a data crystal, about the size of Mara's thumb, glowing with soft blue light. "Well," Mara said into the stunned silence, "that was anticlimactic." Professor Gleam had stopped leaking and started hyperventilating, which for an Aquarian meant their entire body was pulsing rapidly and making disturbing squelching sounds. "She opened it. She actually opened it. 12,000 years of academic research and she just touched it and it opened." "Maybe it was already unlocked," Mara suggested. "And it was not already unlocked," the Zentari administrator said flatly. All four arms crossed in identical gestures of disbelief. "I personally witnessed 3 separate expeditions attempt to access that container using every technique known to modern science." "Okay, but maybe 4th time's the charm and I just happened to be here when—" "Test her on another artifact," the Kralix general interrupted. "One test proves nothing. Could be coincidence or equipment malfunction." "Forerunner technology doesn't malfunction," Vesh muttered from somewhere behind Mara, and he still sounded traumatized from the initial scan. They moved to the next location, the Academy's restricted research wing, where the really dangerous and incomprehensible Forerunner artifacts were kept behind multiple layers of security and probably some prayers to various deities. The second artifact was a door. Just a door, standing in the middle of an otherwise empty room, not connected to any walls or frame. It was carved from the same reality-bending material as the vault, covered in more flowing symbols that hurt to look at directly. "This is a Forerunner transit gate," Corthax explained, his dramatic voice echoing off the research wing's walls. "A doorway to somewhere, though we've never been able to determine where. It's been inactive since it was discovered on Kepler Station 70 years ago. Multiple attempts to activate it have failed." "So you want me to just walk through a potentially dangerous portal to an unknown location?" Mara asked. No, Gleam assured her, though the continued leaking suggested otherwise. "Simply approach it. If you're recognized as creator, it should activate in your presence. You don't need to actually use it." "That's slightly less terrifying, I guess." Mara walked toward the door, and this time she actually felt something. A pulling sensation, like the door was reaching out to her specifically. The symbols began to glow, soft at first, then brighter, until the entire doorframe was outlined in brilliant white light. The space within the door stopped being empty air and became something else, a window, maybe, or a tear in reality. Through it, Mara could see what looked like a massive library, shelves stretching impossibly far in all directions, filled with data crystals that glowed like captured stars. The archive, Korthax breathed, and for once the dramatic delivery seemed entirely justified. The Forerunner Archive, the repository of all their knowledge. We've been searching for it for centuries. And I just found it by walking toward a door, Mara said. I feel like this is setting a really bad precedent for how much effort I should put into future assignments. Dr. Remnick had pushed his way to the front of the group, staring at the portal with undisguised awe. Do you have any idea what this means? The archive contains everything: technology, history, scientific principles that could advance our civilization by thousands of years. It also contains their weapons specifications, the Kralix general added, and his hand was definitely on his sidearm now. And their military strategies. Whoever controls access to the archive controls the future of the galaxy. The portal flickered and stabilized, waiting patiently for Mara to either walk through or step away. She stepped away. The portal collapsed back into empty air, the symbols fading to dark stone once more. Why did you close it? Korthax demanded, several tentacles gesturing wildly. That was the discovery of the millennium. Because that guy over there looks like he's deciding whether to shoot me, Mara said, pointing at the Kralix general. And I'm getting really weird vibes from this whole situation. No one is going to shoot you, Dr. Remnick said, though he shot a warning look at the general that suggested this was more hope than guarantee. 3 artifacts, the Zentari administrator said, tapping notes into their datapad with all 4 hands simultaneously. 3 perfect authentications. The statistical probability of this being coincidence or malfunction is effectively 0. There must be an explanation, Gleam insisted, though their conviction was somewhat undermined by the puddle they were standing in. Humans are a young species, barely 300,000 years old. The Forerunners vanished 50,000 years ago. The timeline doesn't work. Unless, Dr. Remnick said slowly, and Mara could practically see the academic gears turning in his head, unless the timeline is exactly right. Everyone turned to look at him. Explain, Korthax commanded. There's always been a gap in the Forerunner historical record, Remnick said, falling into lecture mode. They seeded the galaxy with technology, uplifted dozens of species, built structures that still stand today. And then, around 50,000 years ago, they just stopped. No war, no catastrophe, no extinction event we could identify. They simply vanished. We know this, the general said impatiently. What's your point? My point is that we've always assumed they went extinct. But what if they didn't? What if they chose to leave? Leave where? Gleam asked. Not where, Remnick said, his eyes lighting up with that manic gleam that academics get when they're on to something. When? What if the Forerunners didn't vanish? What if they de-evolved themselves, went back to a simpler state, scattered themselves on a suitable world, and started over? The silence in the room was deafening. That's insane, the Zentari administrator finally said. It's brilliant, Korthax breathed. The ultimate act of humility. The most advanced civilization in galactic history, choosing to become primitive again. And if they scattered themselves on Earth, Dr. Remnick continued, if they became human, then every human would carry Forerunner genetic markers. We'd all be their descendants. Mara raised her hand like she was in class. Quick question. If that's true, why don't all humans register as creator level? Genetic drift, Remnick said immediately. 50,000 years of random mutation and evolutionary pressure. Most of the Forerunner markers would be degraded or altered, but occasionally, just by chance, someone would be born with a genetic profile close enough to the original that the old recognition systems would still read them as authentic. So you're saying I'm just randomly lucky? Mara asked. I'm saying you're the genetic lottery winner of the century. The Kralix general had finally taken his hand off his weapon, But now he looked disturbed for entirely different reasons. If humans are Forerunner descendants, then we've been condescending to our creator species for 30 years. Oh good, Mara said. I was worried this situation wasn't awkward enough. Professor Gleam had stopped leaking entirely, which Mara was learning meant they were either totally calm or completely dissociated from reality. This changes everything. Every political relationship, every treaty, every trade agreement. The implications are staggering. Can we maybe not tell everyone immediately? Mara suggested. Like maybe sleep on it for a bit? Think things through? Absolutely not, Korthax declared, his voice rising to theatrical heights. This is the most significant discovery in galactic history. It must be shared with all species, broadcast across every communications network, proclaimed from every... The last thing we need is galaxy-wide panic, Dr. Rimnick interrupted, shooting down Korthax's dramatic speech before it could really get going. We need to verify the theory first, run more tests, check other humans, confirm that Mara isn't a unique case. I vote for that plan, Mara said quickly. Very pro-verification. Big fan of not causing galaxy-wide panic. But even as they argued about protocols and procedures, Mara could see it in their eyes. They believed it. The theory fit too perfectly, explained too many mysteries. The primitive humans everyone had been patronizing for 3 decades were actually the descendants of the most advanced civilization in history. And Mara, who'd spent her entire life being aggressively average at everything, had just accidentally become the living proof. This is going to be so weird, she muttered to herself. From the back of the room, Dr. Remnick caught her eye and mouthed, "Sorry." Yeah, Mara thought. This was definitely going to be weird. The next 48 hours were, in Mara's professional opinion, absolute chaos wrapped in bureaucratic nonsense and topped with a generous helping of existential dread. Word had leaked, because, of course it had. You can't drag a cadet through multiple high-security locations, activate ancient artifacts, and open portals to mythical archives without someone recording it and posting it to Galactic Net. By morning, every communication device in the Academy was buzzing with the news. Humans. Forerunner descendants? Possibly. The reactions varied by species. The Zentaris started treating every human on campus like fragile museum pieces. The Kraliks became incredibly awkward, their usual military bearing replaced with stilted over-politeness. The Aquarians just leaked constantly, turning hallways into slip hazards. And Quill? Quill had completely lost it. "You're a Forerunner," they said for the 15th time that morning, all forearms clutching various religious texts they'd apparently been collecting. "A literal Forerunner. In our dorm room, sharing our bathroom." "I'm still just Mara," she said, trying to eat breakfast while her roommate vibrated with barely contained reverence. "Same person I was 3 days ago." "You're a deity." "I'm really not." The text described the Forerunners as gods made manifest. "The text are wrong. I failed my driver's test twice. Gods don't fail driver's tests." But Kratri wasn't listening anymore, too busy reorganizing their shared living space, according to some new system that apparently accounted for housing divinity. The Academy Council had decided to be thorough, which meant subjecting Mara to a comprehensive tour of every Forerunner artifact on Unity Station. There were 17 of them, ranging from the merely ancient to the profoundly unsettling. Artifact 4 was a computational core that had been dormant for millennia. Mara walked past it. It powered on, displaying complex mathematical equations that made Professor Gleam weep with joy. Artifact 7 was a navigation beacon that immediately began broadcasting coordinates to locations nobody had ever heard of. The cartography department nearly rioted with excitement. Artifact 9 was a weapons system, which activated the moment Mara entered the room and caused a station-wide lockdown until she awkwardly asked it to please turn off, which it did immediately. "Maybe don't bring me near the weapons anymore," Mara suggested. The council agreed. By Artifact 12, Mara had developed a routine. Walk in, try not to touch anything, watch as ancient technology came to life anyway, listen to various academics lose their minds, leave, repeat. The real problem came with Artifact 15, a massive Forerunner defense grid built into the station's outer hull. Nobody had been able to activate it in the 80 years since Unity Station was constructed around the ancient structure. It was just there, a monument to technology nobody understood. Mara was walking through the observation corridor with Dr. Remnick and half the Academy Council when she made the mistake of leaning against a wall to rest her feet. The wall happened to be part of the defense grid's control interface. Every alarm on the station went off simultaneously. The grid powered up with a sound like reality tearing. Massive energy cannons emerged from the hull, targeting systems coming online and scanning for threats. Shield generators that hadn't functioned in millennia suddenly blazed to life, encasing the entire station in a protective barrier that shimmered like an angry rainbow. "Turn it off!" the Kralix general shouted, which was rich coming from the guy who'd wanted to test her near-weapons systems. "I'm trying," Mary yelled back, frantically pressing various glowing symbols that had appeared on the wall. "Nothing's happening." Dr. Remnick grabbed her shoulder. "Stop pressing things randomly. That's how you accidentally destroy a solar system." "What do I do then?" "Try talking to it." The archive responded to verbal commands. Mara felt deeply stupid, but she was also standing in front of a doomsday weapon that she'd accidentally activated by leaning on it, so dignity was already out the window. "Hey, defense grid, could you please turn off? We're good here, no threats. False alarm." The targeting system stopped scanning, the cannons retracted, the shields flickered and faded. Within seconds, the grid was dormant again, leaving only the blaring alarms and Mara's embarrassment. "I'm never leaning on anything ever again," she muttered. After that incident, the council became significantly more cautious about which artifacts they exposed her to. Weapons were off the table. Anything labeled experimental was definitely out. They stuck to the more benign technology: archives, navigation systems, computational cores. It was during the testing of Artifact 16A historical database that Dr. Remnick found the evidence he'd been looking for. "Look at this," he said, projecting a holographic timeline above his datapad. The assembled council members leaned in, various optical organs straining to see. The timeline showed Forerunner history, meticulously detailed until approximately 50,000 years ago. Then there was a gap, and then, right where you'd expect to see their extinction, there was instead a single entry. "Project Genesis initiated." Genesis, Korthax breathed. "A beginning, not an ending." Remnick pulled up another file, this one showing genetic data. "The archive contains Forerunner DNA samples. I ran a comparison against the human genome. We're not just similar, we're the same species, just separated by 50,000 years of evolutionary divergence." "They really did it," the Zentari administrator said quietly. "They actually devolved themselves." "There's more," Remnick continued, pulling up what looked like a personal log. "This is from the Forerunner High Council, recorded right before Project Genesis. Let me translate." He tapped the file and a voice emerged from the speakers, synthesized but somehow still conveying emotion. It spoke in a language nobody had heard in 50,000 years, but the translation software rendered it in perfect Galactic standard. "We have reached the apex of achievement. We have mastered matter, energy, time itself. We have nothing left to discover, nothing left to build. And in our perfection we have found only emptiness. We have become stagnant, arrogant, divorced from the struggle that gave our existence meaning. Therefore, we choose to start over, to become small again, to forget everything and relearn it from the beginning. Perhaps then we will remember what it means to wonder, to strive, to be truly alive. We leave our technology behind as a gift to those who will come after, and to ourselves, should we ever return to find it. May our children forgive us for this choice, and may we forgive ourselves for our hubris." The recording ended. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "So they got bored," Mara finally said. "The most advanced civilization in history got so powerful they got bored, and their solution was to turn themselves into primitive apes and hope for the best?" "It's the ultimate philosophical experiment," Gleam said, no longer leaking at all. "Can a species retain its essential nature across complete devolution and re-evolution? And the answer is apparently yes, the general said, looking at Mara with an expression that might have been respect. Because humans are exactly as chaotic and unpredictable as the Forerunner historical records suggest they were. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment, Mara said. It wasn't meant as one, the general replied, but there was almost a smile there. Dr. Remnick closed the files and looked at Mara. The Council is going to want to test other humans. Confirm that this isn't unique to you. But based on what we've found, I think it's safe to say that every human carries Forerunner heritage. You just happen to have won the genetic lottery. So what happens now? Mara asked. Korthax spread his tentacles in a gesture that might have been a shrug. Now we have to figure out what to do with the fact that the species we've been treating as adorable primitives for 3 decades are actually our creator race. The irony is pretty thick, the Zentari administrator admitted. The politics are going to be a nightmare, the general added. And Cadet Kowalski, Gleam said, focusing all their attention on Mara, you have complete access to the archive, to all of Forerunner knowledge and technology. You could change everything. Mara thought about that, about the power suddenly available to her, about the responsibilities and expectations that came with it. Yeah, she said slowly, that sounds like a lot of work, and I have midterms coming up. The silence was profound. Midterms, Korthax repeated flatly. Yeah. I'm barely passing advanced tactics, and if I don't ace the next exam, I'm going to fail the course, so maybe we table the whole accessing infinite cosmic knowledge thing until after finals? Dr. Remnick laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time since this whole mess started. You know what? That's the most human response possible, and probably exactly what the Forerunners hoped for. The news broke galaxy-wide approximately 6 hours after Mara suggested they maybe keep it quiet for a bit. Because of course it did. Dean Korthax, in a moment of what Mara could only describe as catastrophically poor judgment, had decided the discovery was too momentous to suppress. He'd called a press conference, invited representatives from every major species, and delivered what he probably thought was a stirring speech about unity and revelation. What actually happened was galactic-scale pandemonium. The Zentari response was immediate and involved a lot of religious restructuring. Apparently several of their major faiths had prophecies about the Forerunners returning, and now they had to recalibrate their entire theological framework around the fact that the returning gods were currently eating questionable cafeteria food and complaining about student loans. The Kralix military went into emergency council sessions to discuss the implications of having spent 3 decades being mildly condescending to their literal creator species. Commander Vesh reportedly had to take medical leave due to what the doctors called acute existential distress. The Aquarians just leaked, everywhere, all the time. Station maintenance filed 17 complaints in one day. But the real chaos came from the political sphere. Trade agreements suddenly needed renegotiating. Defense pacts required revision. Every treaty humanity had signed as a junior member of the galactic community was now under scrutiny. Because it turned out the junior members were actually the senior members who'd taken a 50,000-year sabbatical. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Earth representatives, who'd spent decades being politely ignored in council meetings, suddenly found themselves with more political leverage than they knew what to do with. Ambassador Williams, a career diplomat who'd been advocating for human interests for 20 years, gave an interview that went viral across 600 species. Do we have any idea how to handle this? The reporter asked. Absolutely not, Williams admitted. We're just as confused as everyone else. We're the same species we were last week. We still can't figure out faster than light travel without getting headaches. We still eat cheese even though most of the galaxy finds it horrifying. The only difference is now we know our ancestors were really into cosmic irony. Mara watched the interview from her dorm room, while Quatriel reorganized their book collection for the 8th time that day. This is insane, Mara said. You're the center of the most significant historical revelation in 50,000 years, Kirill replied, carefully arranging texts by chromatic resonance. Insane is relative. The Academy itself had become a circus. News crews from 40 different species had descended on Unity Station. Students who'd previously ignored Mara now wanted holoshots with her. She'd been invited to give lectures, write papers, and appear on talk shows. She'd declined everything. She still had that advanced tactics exam to study for. The real turning point came 3 days after the announcement, when Mara finally decided to access the archive properly. Not because she wanted cosmic power or infinite knowledge, but because Dr. Remnick had asked nicely and she figured she owed him that much. The transit gate activated at her approach, the portal stabilizing into that window onto impossible architecture. This time, with proper authorization and a full research team, Mara actually walked through. The archive was even more overwhelming in person. Shelves upon shelves of data crystals, each one containing more information than most species had accumulated in their entire history. The space was vast, possibly infinite, and utterly silent except for the soft hum of preservation systems that had been running for 50 millennia. At the center of the archive was a terminal, clearly designed for interface. Mara approached it and the system activated, recognizing her genetic signature. A holographic interface appeared, displaying options in Galactic Standard. Welcome, Inheritor. Forerunner Archive. Complete access granted. What knowledge do you seek? Dr. Remnick and the research team stood back, giving Mara space. They all held recording equipment, ready to document whatever she discovered. Ask it about Project Genesis, Remnick suggested quietly. Find out why they really did it. Mara input the query. The archive processed for a moment, then displayed a file. Not just text or audio, but a full holographic recording. A forerunner appeared before them. Tall, humanoid, but with features that were just slightly off, in ways that suggested 50,000 years of evolutionary drift. The forerunner spoke, and the translation was instantaneous. If you're watching this, then Project Genesis succeeded. You are us, just younger, less burdened by the weight of knowing everything. We reached a point where our civilization had stagnated. Perfect technology, perfect understanding, perfect boredom. We'd solved every problem, answered every question, and in doing so, we'd lost the very thing that made existence worthwhile. The struggle to understand. The joy of discovery. The satisfaction of overcoming limitations. The hologram paused, and something like a smile crossed its face. So we decided to start over, to become primitive again, to forget everything and rediscover it naturally. We scattered ourselves across a world we designated as suitable, what you now call Earth, and triggered a controlled devolution. We locked away our knowledge and technology, key to genetic markers that would occasionally surface in our descendants, not to give you power, but to remind you where you came from, and to see what you'd become without our influence. Another pause. If you're accessing this, you've probably just discovered your heritage. You're probably terrified, overwhelmed, wondering what cosmic responsibilities now rest on your shoulders. Here's our advice. Don't worry about it. Live your life, make mistakes, struggle with problems, laugh at stupid jokes, eat food that's probably bad for you, do all the things we forgot how to do when we became too advanced for our own good. The archive is here if you need it, but you don't have to use it. You don't have to be us. In fact, we'd prefer if you weren't. We already tried being us, and it wasn't as fulfilling as you'd think. The hologram's smile widened. The greatest gift we can give you is the freedom to be imperfect, to be chaotic, to be wonderfully, beautifully flawed. That's what we lost, and what we desperately wanted back. So go forth and be human in all the messy, contradictory, magnificent ways that entails. And if other species find you frustrating or primitive or incomprehensible, remind them that you built everything they take for granted, got bored, and decided being complicated was more interesting than being perfect. The recording ended. The research team stood in stunned silence. They literally just told you to ignore them, Dr. Remnick finally said, and he sounded almost impressed. That's the most human thing I've ever heard, Mara replied. We built galactic civilization, achieved technological godhood, and then decided it was too boring and went back to being weird apes who argue about sandwich definitions. What will you do? Remnick asked. Mara looked around the archive, at the infinite knowledge available to her. Technology that could reshape reality, weapons that could crack planets, scientific principles that would make her the most powerful being in known space. "I'm going to go study for my exam," she said, "and then maybe get pizza. The good kind, from that place on level 12 that everyone says will probably give me food poisoning, but never actually does." "You're not going to access the archive? Use the technology?" "Maybe later. Right now, I think I need to prove I can pass advanced tactics without ancient cosmic cheat codes." As they walked back through the portal, leaving the archive in its eternal silence, Mara couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic joke. The most advanced civilization in history had looked at themselves, realized they'd optimized all the fun out of existence, and decided the solution was to become the exact species that every other civilization found mildly exasperating. It was, Mara thought, the most aggressively human decision possible. And she was okay with that. 3 weeks later, life at the Galactic Defense Academy had settled into something resembling normalcy, if you squinted and ignored all the ways everything had fundamentally changed. Mara passed her advanced tactics exam with a 73%, solidly mediocre. She'd never been prouder of a grade in her life. The Galactic community was still processing the revelation, but the initial panic had faded into a sort of bewildered acceptance. Humans were forerunners. Forerunners were humans. Everyone just had to deal with it now. The political fallout was ongoing. Human representatives suddenly had actual influence in Galactic Council meetings, which they were handling with what could generously be described as chaotic enthusiasm. Ambassador Williams had apparently proposed a treaty revision using a meme as supporting documentation. It had somehow worked. Other humans had been tested against Forerunner technology. Some registered higher than baseline, most didn't. But the genetic markers were there in everyone. Turns out Mara wasn't unique, just unusually lucky in the genetic lottery. 3 other humans had been found with creator-level access, including a janitor on Mars Station and a teenager from Mumbai, who'd immediately used their newfound power to access the archive and download the galaxy's most comprehensive video game collection. The Forerunners would have approved. Commander Vesh had returned to duty but now treated every human on campus with an extremely awkward mixture of respect and residual trauma. He'd started saying please and thank you when processing security clearances, which disturbed everyone who knew him. The Zentari had revised approximately 60% of their religious texts. Krill still treated Mara like a deity, but had at least stopped building shrines in their dorm room after Mara threatened to request a room transfer. Dean Korthax had tried to give another dramatic speech about humanity's place in the cosmos, but halfway through, a human cadet had interrupted to ask if this meant they could get better cafeteria food. The speech ended shortly after. As for Mara, she discovered that having creator-level access to Forerunner technology was mostly useful for mundane conveniences. She'd reprogrammed her dorm's environmental controls to actually work properly. She'd fixed the perpetually broken synthesizer in the cafeteria. She'd even helped maintenance access a sealed section of the station that turned out to contain an entire Forerunner recreational facility, complete with what could only be described as an ancient space gym. The archive remained open to her, vast and full of cosmic knowledge she could access whenever she wanted. She visited occasionally, usually to look up answers to homework questions that her professors insisted she solve without cheating. She'd explained that the Forerunners had left the information specifically for their descendants to use, but apparently academic integrity transcended species. She'd also discovered that the archive had a search function, which she'd used to find the Forerunner equivalent of entertainment media. Turns out they'd been really into philosophical comedy and abstract music that sounded like someone had decided to weaponize mathematics. It was weird, but Mara kind of liked it. The other species were adapting too. The Kralliks had issued a formal apology for 3 decades of unintentional condescension toward the progenitor species, which humans had accepted with good humor, and several jokes about space dad issues that didn't quite translate, but seemed to make everyone uncomfortable anyway. The Aquarians had stopped leaking quite so much, though Professor Gleam still occasionally pooled up when discussing Forerunner history. And the Academy itself had made some changes. Human Cultural Studies was now a mandatory course for all cadets. Earth history had been added to the core curriculum. There was even talk of renaming the institution to acknowledge humanity's contribution to galactic civilization, though the committees were still arguing about it. Mara was sitting in the cafeteria one afternoon, eating pizza of questionable origin and reviewing notes for her next exam, when a first-year Corallix cadet approached her table. He looked nervous, his scales shifting through various shades of uncertainty. "Cadet Kowalski?" he asked, his voice formal. May I ask you a question?" "Sure," Mira said, because she'd learned that being friendly was easier than being mysterious. "What's it like, knowing you're descended from the Forerunners? Having access to all that power and knowledge?" Mara considered the question, taking another bite of pizza while she thought. "Honestly, it's mostly weird. Like finding out your grandparents were famous but they died before you were born, so you never really knew them. The power and knowledge are there, but they don't change who I am. I'm still just me. Still figuring things out. Still making mistakes." "But you could be so much more," the cadet pressed. "You could access the archive, learn everything, become—" "Perfect?" Mara suggested. "Yeah, I could, but that's exactly what the Forerunners were trying to get away from. They had perfection and it made them miserable, so they chose to be human instead. Messy, flawed, struggling humans who had to work for every achievement and earn every discovery." She gestured around the cafeteria, at the dozens of species eating lunch and complaining about homework and gossiping about weekend plans. This is what they wanted. Not power or knowledge or cosmic significance, just life. Actual, complicated, frustrating, wonderful life. And honestly, I think they made the right choice. The Krellicht cadet thought about that, his scales settling into a more stable pattern. "That's not what I expected you to say." "Yeah, well, being unexpected is kind of our species' whole thing. We built galactic civilization, got bored, hit the reset button, and now we're back here eating synthesized cheese and failing math exams. If that's not the ultimate power move, I don't know what is." The cadet left looking thoughtful, and Mara returned to her notes. Krill appeared a few minutes later, all four arms carrying various food items, organized by nutritional content. "You're becoming quite the philosopher," they observed, settling into the seat across from her. "I'm becoming quite tired of people asking me deep questions when I'm trying to eat," Mara corrected. "But yeah, I guess I've had a lot of time to think about it." "And you're truly content? Not using the archive, not accessing the technology?" Mara shrugged. "Maybe someday, if there's an actual crisis or something that needs Forerunner tech to solve, but for now, I'm good. I've got classes to pass, friends to hang out with, terrible cafeteria food to complain about. That's enough." "The Forerunners would approve," Quill said quietly. "Yeah," Mara agreed, smiling. "I think they would." She finished her pizza, gathered her notes, and headed off to her next class. Just another student at the academy, with homework to complete and exams to study for, and a future full of ordinary possibilities. The fact that she could, if she wanted, access the sum total of ancient cosmic knowledge and reshape galactic civilization was just a footnote now. An interesting fact about her heritage, but not a definition of who she was. The Forerunners had spent 50,000 years trying to remember what it meant to be imperfect, to struggle, to grow. Mara figured the least she could do was honor that choice by being exactly what they'd hoped for, wonderfully, stubbornly, magnificently human. And if that meant occasionally fixing the broken synthesizer using technology that predated most galactic civilizations, well, that was just being practical. He'd learned from the best after all. Even if the best had decided that being the best was overrated.